is 7 o'clock, so why don't we go ahead then and call this, what day is it? January 12th, Albany Planning and Zoning Commission hearing to order. And with that, can we please get roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Pilch?
Here.
Commissioner McLeod?
Here.
Commissioner Donaldson? You're on mute, Commissioner.
Here. Sorry.
And Commissioner Momin is absent. And then Chair Waddy.
Here. Thank you. And for the public, new starting at the beginning of this year, every Albany advisory body is going to read into the record a land acknowledgement statement. So I'll go ahead and do that now. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lisan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this Indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all now that now make this their home. So thank you everyone for that. Moving on to item 3 on our agenda. Are there any ex parte communications to disclose this evening?
No, none.
None.
Great. Seeing none, we will move along to item 4, which is our consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine and will be enacted on by one motion. Approval of the consent calendar means that the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified or pulled off the consent calendar by the commission or a member of the public. There will be no separate discussion of these items, again, unless some member of the commission or a member of the public chooses to remove one of these items from the consent calendar. And this evening, we have 2 items on the consent calendar. First up, we have item 4-1, the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from November 11th. And second, we have item 4-2, Planning Application 21-077, Design Review and Parking Reduction for a 2-level addition at 404 Talbot. And with that, do any commissioners wish to remove either of those items from consent? Commissioner Pilch?
Yes, both of them actually.
Okay. All right, then removing both, why don't we go ahead then and just take each item individually and we will hear both of them. So go ahead on the minutes. Why don't you go ahead and kick things off?
Sure. Yeah. So just a very small correction. Let's see. I don't know if I can give you a page number because I'm using this kind of embedded view. It's in the minutes under item 8 in the minutes, new business, 8.1, San Pablo Avenue specific plan, financial feasibility analysis request. I just request that you change the language there. It says, Commissioner Pilch has requested that the Planning and Zoning Commission hold the discussion to consider a recommendation to add a financial feasibility analysis. But I do prefer to call that, and I have called that, an economic analysis instead. So if we could just change that from financial feasibility to economic, that would be great.
Okay, Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, I think it was in the, just more of a typo or mistranslation. I think on page 8, I'm sorry, I can't find it right now, but it was written ergonomic, but it should have been economic somewhere in there. I don't know. But that was it, just a minor point.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Donaldson.
Oh, yeah, only 2 minor things. On page 6, line 11, it should be Keynes Avenue spelled K-A-I-N-S. Just a typo there. That's the only thing. And then on page 7, line 42, the word disillusion seems wrong. I don't think that
I think it should be
refers to the dissolving of redevelopment.
Yeah,
and I don't think disillusion was the right word.
Yeah, not disillusion, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's all. Just minor typos. That's all I have.
Okay.
And with that, I would approve. With those changes, I'd approve or move approval of the minutes. Mhm.
Okay, and since we did take these off consent, we should open it up for public comment.
Oh, that's correct. I'm sorry. Mhm.
That's okay. If the commission's done though, let's go ahead and open it up for public comment. So members of the public, now is your opportunity to speak on the meeting minutes from November 11th. Chris, do you see any speakers?
There are no speakers at the moment.
Okay. Going once, going twice. With that, we'll go ahead and close public comment then and turn it back. And I believe Commissioner Donaldson, you had a motion for us?
Yes, I'll move approval of the minutes from November 10th, 2021. Mhm.
Great. Do we have a second?
I'm happy
I'll
to second those.
Or-
Okay, great. Seconded by Commissioner McLeod. Then on that vote, Commissioner Pilch,
Yes.
Commissioner McLeod,
Yes.
Commissioner Donaldson,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So that motion passes as amended 4-0. With that, that takes us on to the second item on the consent calendar. This is planning application 21-077 for 404 Talbot. And Commissioner Pilch, why don't you go ahead and kick things off since you wish to pull this from consent?
Yeah, thank you. See, am I unmuted? Yes. I am looking for the, oh yeah, here we go. I think the project is great. Only just one issue, one request I would have that if we're looking for outstanding design because of the FAR, I would request that the new gable facade, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but that the facade that rises higher above the current main facade of the house match the front facade in its echoing the false timber, the false exposed timber. It looks like it's going to be just flat instead of having that false timber, but I think it would be nice if it was matched.
Okay.
Any other commission comments before we, or commentary on that? Okay, why don't we go ahead then and open it up for public comment. Members of the public, now's your opportunity to speak on, or I guess we should turn it over to, I assume, Chris, you did not have a presentation on this one since it was consent. Why don't we go ahead and then first see if the project sponsor is here and wishes to either present or respond to Commissioner Pilch's comments.
Yes,
Chris?
Yep, the project architect's in the attendance. I will allow her to speak, Doris Pyle.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, hi, commissioners. Thank you for your time. I don't believe we have any objection to letting in some timbers. As you know, there's generally a flashing detail and water issue that's been a little bit of an issue on the front of that home, and it really won't be seen from the street because it's a two-story addition at the very back of the house. But if that's what it would take to make you happy, I don't have any particular objection to that.
Okay, great. And did you have anything else you'd like to present while you have the floor here before us?
Thank you. No, it sounds like you all reviewed the design and overall find it acceptable. I know we met all codes requirements, setbacks, height restrictions and such. So, you know, I'm happy to answer whatever design issues you might have.
Okay, thank you. Then with that, Chris, why don't we go ahead and open it up for general public comment on this item. So members of the public, now is your opportunity to speak if you'd like to comment on the project at 404 Talbot.
Yes, we have one speaker, Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes to speak starting now.
Thank you. Good evening. I was just going to mention about the parking requirements. I don't know. I noticed it's just a pattern that a lot of these projects keep getting approved with no off-street parking requirements, and some of them are building additional units, which, you know, have more people living in that home or that apartment, that residence. I was just wondering why they just keep getting approved with, you know, no parking restrictions or no parking. I'm just wondering why they keep getting approved. I'm not trying to get off topic, but I just see a big pattern, whole apartment goes up with no off-street parking. I was just wondering how this is sustainable for, long-term Albany if we keep accepting, additions on apartments or houses without creating parking lots or off-street parking. That was my only comment.
Hey, I'm not seeing any other speakers in the queue.
Okay, great. Seeing no other speakers, then we'll go ahead and close public comment and turn it back to the commission for deliberations on this item. I'm certainly, oh, go ahead. Commissioner Donaldson, you're interest.
Sure. Yeah, I observed that difference in the plans too, Nick. And I understand your comment. I didn't raise it myself because I really thought that second story addition was going to be so far back that it really wouldn't make, it didn't really bother me in the sense it wouldn't be very dominant or very significant a change from when seen from the street. And I think that was the most important view. So I was okay with just having the plain stucco on that second floor addition, just for practical reasons. I do believe that having those the exposed wood beams showing there probably do result in maintenance requirements and make it harder to waterproof the building and maintain the stucco and the wood interfaces. So I was okay with it, but I don't know what other commissioners would say, but I don't think it's necessary. For me, from a design review point, I said, no, I don't think it's necessary to require them to add those vertical boards in there on the sort of Tudor style. But I guess I could go either way. I don't know what other commissioners would think. Mm-hmm.
Great,
So,
thanks.
mhm.
Commissioner McLeod.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see the point, but at the same time, when I look at the plan, the addition in the back is really set back pretty far. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In terms of actual sight lines, I think you'd be hard pressed to see much of that at all, unless you're maybe pretty far across the street or even in a house across the street looking out your window or something. I could see at least adding a fascia board along the eaves at the top where it's a little more visible that would match at least the diagonals in the front and not necessarily have to do the verticals. But and those are problematic. They can be problematic details. It's definitely it's harder for the stucco to kind of stick in there with the smaller panels, and the wood tends to leak along the edges, and it's kind of hard to do it well. Takes extra waterproofing, extra care. So in that sense, I'm not really pushing. I wouldn't push hard for that detail either. And I would like to also just bring up the fact that the windows need to be set back a couple inches per code from the plane of the stucco and all that. I don't see an actual window section, but the window type, I think, is one where the glass is closer to the front edge of the face of the window. So I think the detailing for that needs to be done so that the windows are set back per our design guidelines. Otherwise, I don't really have any other objections to the project. It's mostly in the back. It's kind of, I don't know, it's a little boxy in the back, but I don't really object to it. And I don't know if we would want to address the parking issue, but in many cases, there just is no room for a second parking space in this case. It's just physically impossible to do it. So that's why we grant that exception in many cases. So, so that's it for me.
Great. I'll just jump in quickly with my initial comments. I'm supportive of the project sort of clad detailing fascia to the front. To me, the bigger issue is I'm not generally supportive of sort of faux historic elements being incorporated. So if those elements are original to sort of the Tudor style home, to me, it doesn't seem appropriate to mimic those historic elements onto an addition that's being done in 2022. I think it should relate but be distinguishable from the original architectural style. So for that reason, and for the reasons mentioned by other commissioners about the setback and the minimal visibility, I'm not supportive of mandating those requirements. And I agree with Commissioner McLeod. Certainly, we do want to make sure the windows are set back 2 inches. I believe that's included as a condition of approval already in the staff report. And it looked like these were Marvin fiberglass windows with simulated divided lights with the spacer bar in between, which typically tend to be the higher quality window product. So I'm hoping between the condition of approval that's already in there and with that detailing specificity about the spacer bar, that we should get windows that are a high quality product. So that's pretty much it for my comments on that. As to the parking, just to sort of respond to the public comment, just sort of one point of note, we can't discuss projects that aren't actually being agendized and called at the moment. So we can't talk about other hypothetical larger projects. We can only talk about the parking for this project specifically at this time. And for me, the parking justification is, especially for this project, is justified in the fact that there already is an off-street parking space. The issue is that there's just an addition, a pretty modest addition. It's adding a bedroom and expanding basically the kitchen. And I don't see that really triggering a dramatic intensification of parking demand for this property. So for those reasons, I think it's increasing the livability, but not necessarily the parking demand that'll be generated by this household. So for those reasons, I support the project as proposed and would be certainly open to a motion. I see Commissioner Pilch, you also have your hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, so one clarification, I was assuming that I called it a false timber because I was assuming that there weren't actually timbers in there, that the timbers were just made of stucco. So it wasn't, adding another element that might be difficult to waterproof, et cetera. So that's one thing. I figured that would be an easy thing to do with stucco. The other thing is, I think that looking at the project straight on, perhaps you don't see much of the back, but looking at it from the sides, it certainly will be more visible. But it doesn't seem like I have support for that, except that I would like to ask, Chair, it does sound like there was some support for what Commissioner McLeod called the fascia board, just echoing that one board on the diagonal rather than the vertical boards. So I'll go ahead and just make a motion that we approve the project with that addition, that the fascia be echoed in the back as it is in the front on the diagonals right below the roof eave.
On the gable, on the eave of the gable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's a motion, then do we have a second on that motion?
I will second.
Commissioner McLeod seconding. Then on that motion, Commissioner Donaldson.
Yes, I'll vote yes. Mm-hmm.
Commissioner McLeod.
Yes, also.
Commissioner Pilch.
Yes.
And I support that motion as well, 4-0. So reminder to the project applicant to keep the story poles up for the duration of the 14-day appeal period, but otherwise that project is approved with that minor modification. So moving along, we move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is announcements and communications, of which there are none this evening. Next up is agenda item 6, public comments. Now, this is general public comment for members of the public who wish to address the Planning and Zoning Commission on a matter that is not otherwise agendized on this evening's calendar. So with that, if there's anyone who wishes to address the Commission on unagendized matters, please go ahead and get in the queue and raise your hand. And it looks like we have at least one member of the public. Chris, if you can go ahead and get that going.
Hi, good evening. It's Jeremiah. I was just wondering what we'll be doing about vacant lots in Albany. If we're going to talk to the homeowners or the property owner, the parcel owner, and see if they were going to do something with it. I've noticed some up on Albany Hill. You notice that one that faces west. everybody watches 4th of July fireworks from it. I don't know. Maybe that's undeveloped because maybe it's too steep. But maybe there's some empty lots, you know, that are on the flat part that are developable. Developable. Boy, what a tough word to pronounce. You know, so I was just wondering on that. And also properties that just are sitting there. You know, I know Mr. Rago, he's got a couple of things just sitting there. I know right there on Adams, right behind the office I'm leasing on Solano, that house is just sitting there. And the front house and the back house is just sitting there. And it's been vacant for years. So I don't know like what we're gonna do about it, because I know like a lot of your goal, right, is to produce these housing requirements, right? The government says, oh, you have to create so many ADUs per year and so many units per year and so many of this per year and that. Well, we've got these houses that are already built. They're already there, but they're just sitting there empty. What's up with that? Like, why don't we focus on that? Because those places are pretty much abandoned, and pretty much homeless people, you know, could be sleeping in there, and a lot of stuff could be going on inside. The one I want to point out, bye Nadia, have a good day, see you tomorrow. And basically the one I'm speaking about on Adams, if you go look, there's homeless people sleeping in the basement. Okay, they're sleeping in the basement, and
Did they say anything when they left?
No, that was it. Coast Guard and Customs left, and that was it. And then you know, so I don't know. You got people sleeping underneath there, you know, and also what are we really doing about this house with all the rats around the block that everybody keeps talking about? You know, it's a public health crisis. We got to do something about that.
Okay, time's up. I'm not seeing any other speakers in the queue.
Okay, last call for public comment. Seeing no one else raising their hand, we'll go ahead and close public comment and turn it back to item 7 on our agenda, which is possible action items. We have several this evening. First up is item 7-1. This is planning application 21-065, design review. Oops, screen's switching back and forth here. Design review conditional use permit for a 2-level addition at 1023 Keynes, 1023 Evelyn Avenue. And before we get started, I do have to recuse myself on this item since I live within 500 feet of the project address. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner Pilch, to run this item and let you all take it from here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so let's see, do we have a presentation from staff then?
Yes, we have. I'll do a quick presentation and then we're happy to answer any questions afterwards. Excuse me. Once again, this is planning application 21065, design review and conditional use permit for a 2-level addition at 1023 Evelyn Avenue. Some background on the property. The subject property is a 5,000 square foot lot with a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,582 square foot or 87 square foot home built in 1946. City records show the following work done to the property. Notably, design review and variance approval was granted for a 627 square foot addition on the side yard in 1979. Here's a street view of the property as it sits today. Project requests. The applicant is seeking design review approval for a ground floor expansion and remodeling along with a 2nd-story addition. A conditional use permit is also required to modify the existing non-conforming northwest wall. Altogether, the project scope would result in a 4-bedroom, 3.5-bathroom, 2,502 square foot home with a maximum height of 26 feet and 1 inch. Here's an existing front elevation of the home. And here's the proposed front elevation. Exceptional design. Projects which exceed a 0.45 FAR are subject to exceptional design as reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Exceptional design treatments include a combination of wood paneling and stucco siding, new gable roof forms for both the main level and the second story addition, a new front porch design, a metal awning on the south side of the home above a staircase window, and a new rear deck with slider doors at the rear of the home. Conditional use permit. The required front yard setback for single-family homes in Albany is 15 feet. The existing front yard setback for this home is 12 foot 10 inches and is thus non-conforming. The applicant is proposing to recess a portion of the northwest wall approximately a foot, resulting in a 13 foot 9 inch front yard setback. The proposed front yard setback is still non-conforming, however, less so than that of the existing home. A conditional use permit is required to modify the wall as proposed pursuant to section 2024-020. The applicant is seeking approval from the commission for the conditional use permit to modify this existing non-conforming northwest wall. And then here's just some screenshots from both the existing and proposed setback. You'll see on the left, there's a 12 foot 10 front yard setback here. The applicant is proposing to modify it and recess it approximately a foot, which would result in 13 foot 9 for this portion of the home. Parking. There's an existing single car garage located at the rear of the home that is proposed to be converted into an ADU. Pursuant to section 2020-080 of the Albany Municipal Code, replacement parking is not required with the associated garage conversion into an ADU. The applicant is proposing a new single car garage, however, located along the street front of the property. The garage is proposed to be 16 feet wide and will have an interior connection with the primary dwelling. A new 14-foot wide curb cut is proposed to align with the new garage. Garage door refinement. In reviewing the project with the city's residential design guidelines, it's noted that single car garage doors are preferred with some materials such as steel, glass, and sculpted wood called out as acceptable. The applicant is proposing a 16-foot wide garage door, as I stated, and that would take up a substantial portion of the property's street front. There are no materials called out for the proposed garage door based on the plans that were provided to staff. The commission may consider placing a condition of approval indicating that the applicant shall work with staff on a refined garage door design to complement the overall project. Staff has received a number of correspondences, 8 in total. A majority of the correspondences voice support for this project. One correspondence voices concerns with the construction associated and the associated noise on Evelyn Avenue. The project is categorically exempt from SEQRA review pursuant to section 15303. And recommendation. Staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the proposed project subject to the findings and conditions of approval. The commission may also consider placing a special condition of approval requesting that the applicant work with staff to refine the proposed garage door design to complement the project and to be more consistent with the residential design guidelines. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, and was the applicant going to make a presentation too, or no?
It was not
They
indicated.
certainly don't have to.
Let's see, they are, I'm going to stop my screen share so I can see the participants. So we have the applicant raising their hand. Looks like they would like to speak.
Okay, if you'd like to speak briefly about the project, could you let the applicant in then?
One moment.
Hello.
Go ahead, please. Yes.
All right. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Teresa Esparago Liu, and I'm joined tonight by my father, Ricardo Esparago, the applicant and homeowner, and my husband, Theo Liu. We just wanted to first introduce ourselves as longtime Albany residents. My parents, Ricardo and my late mother, Philomena, moved into this home in 1975, and I was raised here my entire life until I was 18. And after graduating Albany High, I never thought I'd move back to Albany until the exact day that my mother passed in 2014. Apologies if I'm getting a little emotional, but this home means a lot to us, which is why on that very day, I decided to move my family in with my father, not only to be there during this difficult time, but because this house has such an incredible amount of history and significance for my immediate and extended family. So this project would really allow us to both honor the past, yet move us into the future by modernizing the interior space and utilizing universal design principles to accommodate our multi-generational family needs. As such, we just wanted to clarify a few things about our project, including the conditional use permit. So again, by utilizing the universal design principles, we have intentionally designed the house for occupants of all ages, but also trying to be mindful to design the house with the future in mind. So the conditional use permit is for revisions to the existing front of that house. The wall that Chris mentioned is actually going to be the front of the garage. And we're actually moving it back to allow more space for the driveway. So while we know that the garage that we're requesting is wider than normal, it will allow us for an off-street parking space, also hopefully allow us to park a car in the driveway. But most importantly, the wide garage will allow us to not only park our car in the garage, but fully swing the doors out to either aid us in supporting children in and out of the vehicle. We have 2 children, but also for the future, you know, should my father or other elderly members of our family have mobility issues in the future, you know, for example, need of a walker or wheelchair, we want to have that extra wide space that would allow him or other people to maneuver in and out of the garage as needed. Lastly, we want to note that we took the design principles to heart when we were thinking about the architectural design and addition of a welcoming front porch with a covered entry, our gabled roofs, and the use of high quality materials, including aluminum clad windows throughout. And we also created a landscape plan with drought resistant plants and pavers. So we believe the architectural and landscape design will be a significant upgrade to what the property looks like today. And we hope for it to be a positive contribution to the block and the community for many years to come. So with that, we are happy to address any or all questions or comments about our project. And our designers are here as well, and they're on the line to answer any technical questions as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for your comments. Commissioners, do you have any questions for staff or the applicant? Commissioner Donaldson.
Certainly, yes. I'll ask the question. Thank you for your presentation, and I appreciate what you're doing here, and I really appreciate the idea of working on toward developing a multi-generational living arrangement for your family. Like the staff, the thing that I see from a design review point of view is the width and size of the garage door right in the front. It's not unusual in Albany to have some real large, even double garages. But on your block and in most of the city, the garage doors are narrower. I appreciate what you're doing to have an accessible indoor space. I want to ask whether you would consider narrowing the actual width of the garage entry. In other words, instead of having a 16-foot wide door, perhaps would you consider having a 14-foot wide door or a 12-foot wide door instead of the one you have now? It's just I just want to ask you that. So if you could comment on that, I'd appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We would like to speak with our designers on that point, and you know, we would like to have them mock it up for us and look at renderings. You know, we want to make sure that we can access the garage. As you can see from the plans, the stairs take up room, so we'd have to think about the placement and what that would look like. As drawn, the garage door is centered on the garage. If we were to minimize it and also allocate room for the stairs, it might be further to the left.
Right.
Hi, commissioners. My name is Theo. I'm Teresa's husband. I would also just note that we recognize that we didn't specify the materials for the garage door in the plans, but we're more than happy to work with the commission and work with coming up with what the commission deems to be an appropriate material for the door. We sort of already thought that we would get something that was high quality, combined wood, aluminum potentially. So we are most definitely open to working with the commission and installing a high quality door that matches the architectural design of the home.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Mhm.
Okay. And that's it for you, Commissioner Donaldson?
That's fine for now. Yes.
Okay. And Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, good evening. Yeah, I'd like to thank the applicants for their presentation. I appreciate their, they're interested in staying in Albany and maintaining their household. And, multi-generational living is great. I have a similar question, I guess, to Commissioner Donaldson about narrowing the garage door. I don't see that it would actually need to be quite so wide, and it could be 12 feet and still provide access, plenty of access for a vehicle and people moving in and out of the garage. And another question about widening the curb cut. And I'm looking at the front photo of the front of the house, and I'm just concerned that we'd be losing a street parking space if we are widening the curb cut. And I'm wondering if we can make the curb cut work without widening it. You could still drive in and access a wider driveway and still get in and out. So that's just one concern. And then my other question, I guess, for the applicant would be, what kind of siding? It's a little hard to tell what kind of siding you're doing at the front porch. It looks, that is the only place there is wood siding compared to stucco everywhere else, I guess. So should the applicant just tell us what kind of wood siding there, what kind of treatment that is?
Hi, our designers are on the line, and I think he's trying to raise his hand. I don't know if you see that, Chris.
Oh, is that Ji-Hong Liu?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioner. Couple things to answer your questions. First one is for the garage door. When we designed this building, we did a pretty thorough study of the street front. So most of the house, they are having a single garage door. The reason I believe is because those houses are single story, and then they are a little bit narrower. But now, since we're making the house taller, also wider, so one of the reasons we propose a wider garage door is also that I believe the scale-wise, it looks more in keep with the style of the house. That's one of the reasons why I propose a wider garage door. And then the third question for the siding. So the overall siding for the house will be stucco, mostly sand finish, smooth finish stucco. And then for the wood siding that we're going to use, we are considering to use cedar with a natural stain.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions at the moment.
Okay. And thank you, Commissioner McLeod. And I don't have any questions either at the moment. So why don't we go ahead and go to general public comment before we come back to the commission. I believe we have one commenter.
Yeah, we have one speaker. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes to speak starting now. Oops.
Jeremiah, are you there? I don't know that Jeremiah is hearing us. He's not unmuting, so maybe we'll come back if needed. But looks like we have, is there anyone else from the public who wanted to speak? And I'm not seeing any other raised hands, so I think we can bring it back to the commission. So would any commissioner like to make some comments or propose a motion? Go ahead, Commissioner Donaldson.
Sure. All right. My question still stands about the garage, and I don't know how to proceed on this. I really do think it is a little bit out of proportion with that real wide garage door in the front. I think that Commissioner McLeod's comments about the curb cut and the potential lost parking space is really spot on, and I share that concern as well. I think we need to verify that. We shouldn't be losing a parking space on the street if that's a possibility. And I have to admit, when I did my field work on this, I didn't look at that closely and missed that issue and didn't think about it, and didn't look to see if the widened driveway is going to shorten the existing curb so much that we'd lose the space there on the street. That'd be an important issue for me. So I want to have a narrower driveway if possible. And I'd really like to see, I guess I'd like to see some design study about what the facade might look like with a 12 or 14 foot garage door. Now, Christopher has suggested in his presentation, I think, that one of our options is to approve this or defer to staff to resolve this issue of the garage doors. I think I would be comfortable with that. And then we could move the project forward tonight and have staff represent us in looking at working with the architect to do some redesign work with that facade. I'm not sure I agree with the architect's comments that having that wide garage door provides a good balance. I think it would be fine to have some more stucco there on one or both sides of the garage. I think that would not be detrimental to the balance of the project. You know, I don't know, maybe even widen the porch by a foot or two, if that's possible, and still leave the garage interior the same size. I like the idea that the interior of the garage is large so that you could have someone get out of a car and move into a wheelchair if necessary, or a walker in the future. I think that's a fine idea. And I like that, but you don't need a real wide garage door to do that, to my way of thinking. So those are my comments. I think we have two options here. One would be to continue it and bring it back with a modified design, or the other one would be to approve it with staff to work on this area of concern that we have. I do not have any other concerns about the project. I like it. I like a lot of it. I like what they're being done here. I think it's a big project. It's going to be a lot of work. The interior will be completely reworked on this building, and it would really make a very fine, up-to-date house. Very livable environment for a multi-generational family with the ADU in the back. I really do like the project, and I like the overall concept. So those are my comments right now. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner Donaldson. And before I go to Commissioner McLeod, I just want to mention that we did receive a number of correspondences about this project, and they were all in favor of the project, but we did have a couple of questions about construction and the constraints or around construction and/or what the neighbors can expect for construction, and so I'd like to staff to address those in a moment. But before I do, first I want to ask staff if they had any communications with the applicant about the driveway width or the curb cut width.
Originally, the curb cut was actually wider than what's presented before you tonight. So we did have communication with them and requested maybe shrinking it down to 14 feet from what it was originally at 16 feet to match the garage door. And so those conversations were had. Commissioner Pilcher, you're muted.
Thank you. See, the applicant has their hand up as well. I think maybe they're wanting to address this curb cut issue. So if we could just bring them in briefly to talk about the perhaps their motivations for the wide curb cut in driveway.
Sure.
Hello, thank you for allowing us to comment on this. We've been listening intently to the commentary about the garage door width, and based on this conversation, we are willing to reduce the size to we feel like a 14-foot is appropriate for the garage door, and we also are open to working with staff or commissioners to explore curb cut adjustments to maintain maximum parking on our street.
Okay, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Okay, and then while I'm got the floor, if the staff could also talk about the what are the constraints on construction? We did have a couple of correspondences about construction and what we can expect. Can you tell us first of all the days and hours that construction is allowed? Yeah, either Christopher or Jeff.
Christopher, would you like me to take that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Jeff. Sorry.
So our construction hours Monday through Saturday are 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then on Sundays, it's 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then exceptions for major holidays.
Okay. And I assume we have ordinances about not allowing dust to carry and remediations like that?
Yes, and what we find works best is if there's an issue that someone is observing, either give us a call during business hours, or if it's for some reason very late or very early, call the police department. And in those cases, a patrol officer can come by and check in. But we'll usually, if we get a complaint about this, our inspector will talk to the contractor, whether it's dust or construction hours or noise. Our inspector will come by and talk to the contractor. And 9 times out of 10, that conversation is all that's necessary. Yeah. And if it needs to get escalated, we will, but that's pretty rare. I wouldn't expect that to happen in this case.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jeff. Appreciate it. And sorry to keep you waiting, Commissioner McLeod. Why don't you go ahead with your comments?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Commissioner Donaldson on the garage door. I think it should be smaller. In fact, I would propose that 12 feet would be wide enough, plenty wide enough to get a car in and out, one car. An 8-foot wide garage door is sufficient generally for a single car. So 12 feet would be 4 feet wider than that. That's plenty wide. It's also kind of a structural issue. You do have structural considerations when you have wide garage doors and the walls next to them are not wide enough to be seismically resistant. So if the garage door is narrower, it also helps the house structurally. It looks like they've drawn a sectional roll-up door, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. But if they're doing natural cedar on the paneling, then perhaps they could at least match the wood tone, to at least tie that together. I don't really have any other objections to the project per se, except for the curb cut. I would propose leaving the curb cut as is, and the driveway can widen. It can be wide enough at the garage door, and it can curve around a little bit towards the front of the lot to the curb cut. I really oppose losing one parking space on the street that would otherwise, it wouldn't have to be given up otherwise. So I would say just keep the curb cut, make the garage door 12 feet wide.
To clarify, when you say keep, oops, getting an echo. When you say keep the curb cut, you mean keep the curb cut as it exists currently
Keep
right
the
now?
existing curb cut as it is, not change it at all. There's still plenty of room to go in and out of the driveway for single vehicle. And the driveway can certainly widen after the sidewalk to, so there's no constraint on how wide the driveway can be, but I would not have the curb cut any wider, because when I look at Google Street View, I see 2 parking spaces in front of the house. And if you widen the driveway significantly, you're going to lose at least, you're going to lose about a half a space, which basically means you have one space instead of two. So I would keep that the way it is and not change it. You know, the cedar paneling on the front porch is fine. I like the fact that they're making a wider front porch. I think that's a nice design element, kind of thoughtful for the neighborhood. Hopefully that would be used and, you know, be a nice place for people to sit and kind of keep an eye on the neighborhood and provide a public presence. It's kind of a neighborhood friendly kind of design, so that's nice. In terms of universal design, it's not really in our purview necessarily to make changes internally, but if you really are doing in a universal design, your bathrooms should be bigger. You know, provide for a 5-foot turnaround radius, 5-foot diameter circle in the bathroom for ADA accessibility. That's the kind of thing I would do, especially in the ADU unit. I guess we're not allowed to talk about the ADU, but if we're talking about universal design, the bathroom should be generous. The doors should be wider. There should be a turnaround space for wheelchairs. There's a whole way to design cabinets and sinks and everything for that. So, you know, you might just put some more thought into how the bathroom is designed, especially on the main floor, which would be used by somebody with accessibility, disability issues. Yeah, and I'm fine with the garage door being, or the garage being the size it is now internally. I don't think you lose anything by making the garage door a little smaller. You're still able to pull the car in there and get people in and out both sides, or even, you know, move a wheelchair in there. You know, an ADA parking space is 12 feet wide. So, you know, with the loading zone. So, I mean, that's certainly feasible. Otherwise, you know, I think it's going to be a nice place to live. It's a nice design with a great room in the back, family friendly, home office for, you know, a lot of us are working at home now. So yeah, it has a lot of nice features. The only other point I would make is with our design guidelines, the windows do need to be set back a couple inches. It looks like they've chosen nice windows, but in the section on page A9, the window is shown, the glass of the window is pretty much shown flush with the stucco. It needs to be set back 2 inches. So, you know, I appreciate having the window detail in there, and I think we should require that to be as part of all our applications, so we can actually see what's proposed. So that window detail needs to be modified to meet our code guidelines. So, you know, other really than the garage door and the driveway and the curb cut, I don't have any objections to the project, and I support it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner McLeod. Can staff clarify about the window detail? Is it a requirement that the windows be set back, or is that something we have to specify?
It is a general condition of approval that the windows be recessed 2 inches from the main plane. So that's generally captures that. The applicants don't always provide the window details, but it's something we can request going forward if that's helpful.
Well, yeah, I think just to make it absolutely clear for applicants that, you know, they need to do that. And if they show us that they have that in their plans, then we know it's going to happen, versus something gets built and then at final inspection, the inspector comes out and says, what about your windows? You know, it's just making it much clearer in advance that we should be, you know, seeing what these details are.
Yeah, it seems like we are going to direct staff to ask to make some modifications or refinements to the garage. So at that same time, maybe staff can ask for a revision to the drawing with the proper window details, just so that it matches the conditions of approval and there's no misunderstanding. So I agree with everything that my fellow commissioners have said. I don't think the garage door itself needs to be wide. I think it can be a standard width that fits one car, and the interior can be whatever size it they want it to be. And I agree that a nice large interior to a garage can be good for both accessibility and just, a general comfort and ease of use. And I agree that the curb cut should remain as it is currently. We should not expand the curb cut and the driveway can remain as it is in the plans, though. So I think those were the things that we were talking about. So it sounds like what I heard also is the applicant seems to be amenable to making changes. So what do my other commissioners think? Should we just approve it with the condition that staff work on the garage details with the applicant? Go ahead, Commissioner Donaldson.
I'm prepared to move the project. The issue to me, I guess, right now is the applicant has said they're willing to reduce the garage door to 12 to 14 feet wide, and Commissioner McLeod is proposing 12 feet wide. I'd be prepared to move approval of the project at 14 feet wide, I guess, and I don't know if the votes are there or not. But I could make approval, and let's discuss it or see if it can get a second. I'll move approval of planning application 21065, design review and a conditional use permit for a two-level addition at 1023 Evelyn Avenue, with the modifications that the garage door be narrowed to be no more than 14 feet wide, and that the curb cut design be modified to ensure that no on-street space is lost. That would be my motion. Mm-hmm.
And do you want to include that staff can work with the applicant on other garage details as well?
I'm not including that. I don't think we need to do that. I think I just go. Okay. I think the staff will work with the applicant on the final design and on what the garage door looks like, and the applicant has heard our comments. So,
okay. And Commissioner McLeod, would you like to second that motion or present a different motion?
Well, I think proportionally it would look better at 12 feet even. That's 1 foot on each side is kind of minimal in terms of what's left is stucco, I think, or even seismic resistance. We've got a whole bunch of soft story issues kind of with garage doors like that all over town. I would prefer 12 feet. But at the same time, it basically is a soft story issue at the front of the house. There's a lot of void in that front wall. A lot of soft story issues in the back of the house as well, but that's for their structural engineer to work out.
Doesn't the building code approval take care of the strength issues, Ian?
Yes, yeah, it will, but making, we're forever.
That's more detailed than we get.
I spend part of my day job, we spend our time retrofitting these garage doors to be seismically stable, right? With the addition of a very expensive prefab shear walls or moment frames, and this garage door's design has zero seismic resistance for that part of the house. I mean, literally zero. So I think a 12-foot door would allow for about 3 feet on each side, which is about the minimum you need to make them seismically stable. So, I would just, I don't know, I guess if I could make a counter motion.
Sounds like maybe I should withdraw my motion and we should move to continue the project and bring it back to us on a consent calendar, looking at possibility of a 12-foot wide door.
We could do that, or Commissioner McLeod, you could make a substitute motion to that's essentially the same as Commissioner Donaldson's motion if you want, but specifying 12 feet instead of 14 feet.
Yep, that's true.
Well, okay. I would move approval of PA 21-065 design review conditional use permit for a 2-level addition at 1023 Evelyn Avenue with a 12-foot wide garage door, maintaining the current curb cut so that there's no loss of parking space in front of the house. And the only other thing I would consider would be maybe it would be a recommendation to match the garage door wood with the paneling, the wood paneling on the front of the house as a design element.
Okay, that's a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm okay with seconding that motion. So we have a substitute motion we can vote on. Any further discussion before we do that, though?
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that. It feels to me like we're kind of forcing the applicant to do something they don't want to do here. And I sometimes that's okay, but this is a real good project, and I'm nervous about. I'm not comfortable really putting the applicant in that kind of bind, and I think it's a pretty significant issue for them, and for the way the house is designed. So, I guess I could vote no.
Well, how about this? We could say we could make that we could vote on that with the condition that if it's not acceptable to the applicants, that it be brought back to us for further review. That way, you wouldn't be forcing the applicants to do it.
That would help.
But
that would help me. That's
okay.
Fine. That's okay.
Would you?
Can we do that? I guess we could. Yeah.
Well, we can make a friendly amendment. Ask if Commissioner McLeod is okay with the amendment to, if the applicant is not okay with 12 feet, to bring it back to us for further discussion.
Okay.
That would be fine. I mean, I think they'd have to, then the burden would be on them to show us the different options and convince us that 12 feet absolutely didn't work, which I would find hard to believe, because you could certainly drive one car through a 12-foot wide garage door, and I think aesthetically it would also look better to be smaller.
Yeah. Okay. Now we've made that pretty clear so far, but
okay.
So I will second. I will continue my second with that friendly amendment. And is that process okay with staff? Any concerns there with staff on that process? Or,
I think that works for us. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Great. Cool. Okay. So to just recap the motion, since we've been back and forth a little bit, I believe Commissioner McLeod's motion is to require a 12-foot garage door and keep the curb cut as it is currently, or at least allowing two on-street parking spaces in front of the property. And if the applicant is not okay with the 12-foot door, that the applicant come back to us with options for their design options, and an explanation of why they think that a 14-foot door is necessary, or whatever size they want is necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully I captured that correctly. So so we have that motion.
Okay.
And any further discussion? Seeing none, then I'll ask for a vote. Commissioner McLeod?
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Donaldson?
Yes.
And I will vote yes on that as well. So, and so in the event that the applicant is okay with the 12-foot door and this does not come back to us, the story poles need to stay up for a period of 14 days, I believe. And that concludes this item. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes item 7-1, and we're moving right along to the next item on our agenda, which is 7-2. This is a work session on the 2023 to 2031 housing element site inventory. And with that, I'll turn it over to, I believe it's either staff or Barry for a presentation.
Yeah, I'll just kick it off. And Chris, if you could bring up Barry as a panelist, that would be great. We're going to turn this over to our housing element general plan consultant, Barry Miller. Barry has been working with us for a number of years, first on our current housing element that's in place. He also worked with us on our current general plan, and now is leading the effort with respect to the preparation of the new housing element. And with that, now that he's up on the panel with us, I will turn it over to Barry to make a presentation.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, and good evening, everybody. I'm going to share my screen to get going here. All right. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening. And we're going to be talking this evening about the housing element. Once again, this is the fourth in a series of study sessions that we're holding with the commission. This is, we're kind of at the good part now. We're talking about housing sites, and we're talking about some of the changes that we will need to make in order to accommodate our fair share of the regional housing needs allocation. Before I get into the presentation, I do want to point out that in your agenda packet for this evening, you had a staff report, and then there were two attachments to that staff report. Attachment A was a detailed inventory of every site that we identified in the city of Albany as a potential housing opportunity site. Attachment B was a study of other projects along San Pablo Avenue and the densities of those projects, so that we can make some good educated estimates of the likely densities of parcels along San Pablo in Albany. And we'll be referring to both of those this evening. So just for context, where we are in the process, I apologize for my voice, a little bit hoarse here. The housing element meetings we've had so far were an orientation to the element, an evaluation of the prior element, which we did with you last summer. We went through the housing needs assessment in September, and we have a few more meetings ahead related to housing constraints, fair housing, and then we will get into the policies and programs around May of this year so that we can bring the draft element forward in June. So the big picture for the housing site analysis is that we're under state law, the city has to demonstrate to the state through its housing element that it has the capacity for 1,114 units over the next 8-year period. Again, as I've said in previous meetings, this doesn't mean that we have to build the units. It means we have to demonstrate to the state that we have land zoned in the community that can accommodate units at different income points. In our case, we have about 486 units of lower income, that's low and very low, that we need to demonstrate capacity for. That is typically land that's zoned for multifamily housing. And then we have roughly a little bit over 600 units for moderate and above moderate income housing. When we designate a site on the map as a housing opportunity site, that does not mean that it must be developed or that it will be developed during the planning period. It also does not limit the use of property to housing or affordable housing, although if the site is used for a non-residential purpose or a non-affordable housing purpose, we may need to make a finding that we have adequate capacity on the remaining sites in the city to meet our needs. So I wanted to point out that there were some new rules.
Barry, I'm sorry to just jump in here. First question is it okay to jump in, or would you like us to hold all the questions to the end?
I think it's fine. If you want to jump in, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no, I do. I won't try not to jump in too much, but you just mentioned, because of what you mentioned about opportunity sites not necessarily being developed. Doesn't state law though say that these sites should be likely to be developed? Wouldn't that be fair, or am I getting that wrong?
They should be developable, and we should have some reasonable evidence that they can be developed during the time frame of the housing element. So we would not want to put a site on the list if we know for a fact it's not going to be developed. But we certainly, we don't need to say that it's absolutely going to be developed. We don't have to have a letter from the property owner, for example, committing to its development.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so a few state laws that have been, excuse me just a second, I'm just going to get some water here. I've been having this issue all day long with hoarseness. I apologize for that. So first of all, we need to use realistic capacity when we estimate our development potential. And what this means is that we can't say that because a site is zoned for 63 units per acre, that it's going to develop at 63 units per acre. We actually have to look at comparable projects on comparable sites and see how they're being developed. So we did this as part of this process. If we're looking at housing element sites that are less than half an acre or more than 10 acres, or sites that are non-vacant, we need to demonstrate to the state that they are viable development sites. There are certain limits on carrying over sites from the last housing element, and I'll be happy to address those later in the presentation. We have to maintain a buffer of extra sites in the event that the sites that we've shown become unavailable. In other words, we're going to identify a list of housing opportunity sites to show capacity for 1,114 units. We have to provide additional sites in the event that any of those sites that we've listed become unavailable during the planning period. And we have to identify which sites could potentially support lower income housing. So there are a number of steps that we go through in this process. These are laid out in the staff report. I'm going to walk you through what I've identified as several tiers that comprise our list of sites. The first tier are committed projects. So we expect that projects that have been approved by the Planning Commission and City Council, or that are pending approval, will be approved and developed during the next 8 years, which is the time horizon for this housing element. So the first step in this process is to look at all of the approved or pending projects and subtract them from our RHNA total. And this is done by income category. So for example, we know that the satellite affordable housing project on Cleveland Street is going to be affordable to low and very low income households. We know the number of affordable units in the Albany Bowl project. So all of these are used to adjust the total. And so we have basically a subtraction of almost 300 units from our 1,114 total. That does include 86 units that are in the lower income category. So the lower income assignment is adjusted to roughly 400 units from what we had shown you earlier. The above moderate is adjusted down to 417 units. So once we get beyond the committed projects, we have our second tier, which are vacant residential lots. The caller earlier in this meeting was asking about lots on Hillside. And yes, these are all included in our inventory. We have very few vacant lots in the city that are zoned R1 or R2. We've actually sorted all of the assessor parcel data for Albany, more than 5,000 parcels, to see those that are coded as vacant by the tax assessor, have gone out and looked at all of those properties and identified the potential for only 13 units, and that's presumed to be above moderate income housing on those 10 lots that we've identified. So the third tier of properties are what we're calling unsubdivided residential land. There's really only one large unsubdivided residential property in Albany, and that's the Pierce Street property that's immediately south of the Gateview condominiums. It is a 10.79 acre parcel. It is listed for sale by a number of commercial real estate agencies. This site has not been counted. It actually was counted in the 1992 housing element, but then it wasn't counted in subsequent housing elements, in part because of various voter initiatives and interest in purchasing the site by the Trust for Public Land and others. Right now, this site is zoned 6 units per acre, which would enable 65 units. That, because of the density, would not be eligible to be counted as affordable housing. But we are recommending that this parcel be included in the city's inventory. The question, and this is a discussion question for the commission tonight, is whether the housing element should suggest that we look at increasing the allowable density on this property from 6 units per acre to something higher. And again, just for context, the density on this property was initially limited by Measure D way back in 1978 to 12 units per acre. In 1994, Albany voters approved Measure K, which reduced the density on the site to 6 units per acre, and that was approved by nearly a 3/4 vote. So it's a question of whether in the last 38 years, or 28 years, I guess, 28 years, the mood of the community has changed where the voters might support reverting back to a 12 unit per acre density on that site, or potentially even a higher density on that site with some conditions about the design of the project on Pierce Street. And this is a question whether we don't need this site for the RHNA. We don't actually have to rezone it in order to meet our numbers. But there are issues around equity and the location of our housing opportunity sites. We're being asked by the state to demonstrate that we're not clustering all of our housing opportunities in a single neighborhood or location, and that we should look at other parts of Albany for opportunities for higher density. So this is a legitimate area to consider additional units. And this is really a question for the commission and city council as to whether or not we should have a housing program to consider higher densities on this site in the future. So we've asked you to consider that at the end of this presentation. Okay, the next tier are underutilized R3 sites. These are properties primarily in the Brighton Avenue area and the Cleveland Pierce area in the western side of the city, where the zoning is R3 and allows for 63 unit per acre multifamily development. But the sites are what you might call underdeveloped. And by that, we mean they're developed with single family homes where multifamily buildings are allowed. There may be empty lots between multifamily buildings. In some cases, we have small houses with low floor area ratios, or sites where there may be a string of lots that are under common ownership. We looked primarily for rental houses in the R3 area. So rather than owner-occupied houses where there was a low improvement value relative to the land value based on the assessor data, and came up with, again, a very small number. We only identified 4 sites in the R3 zone that met all of these criteria, and those sites have the potential for 33 units. Again, a fairly small number, not a big component of our housing need when you're looking at 1,100 units. Tier 5 is the San Pablo Avenue corridor. This is where much of the city's housing potential is. You guys have been having work sessions and meetings on the San Pablo Avenue specific plan. And as you know, that specific plan includes draft standards for this area that would allow significantly more building height and intensity, and that would change daylight plane requirements, parking requirements, open space requirements, and so on. And we basically used the new standards in the specific plan and the existing standards and did two levels of analysis for all of the properties along San Pablo Avenue. So the sites were identified, again, based on their size, with a preference towards larger sites, sites that were on the opportunity site list from the previous housing element, sites that were obviously underdeveloped. For example, a site that was a parking lot not associated with a particular business or building, sites that had a low ratio of land value to improvement value, improvement value to land value ratio, floor area ratios that were very low. We looked at sites where there had been prior development proposals. So for example, there was a property where the Planning Commission had a study session a few years ago for a series of properties in the 900 block of San Pablo, where an owner was proposing a multifamily or mixed use project. Those kinds of proposals were screened and looked at. And finally, ownership. So if there was, again, a string of parcels all under one ownership with with properties meeting these criteria, those would have made the cut to be on that opportunity list. And we came up with about 20 opportunity sites. For each of those opportunity sites on the San Pablo Avenue corridor, there was a 2-page fact sheet that was prepared. This is in Appendix A. That includes the address and assessor parcel number, the size of the property, the general plan and zoning designation, how the site's currently being used, if the site was included in the last inventory, and again, what the yield would be with the specific plan and without the specific plan. There's also a narrative, a couple of paragraphs about what's going on the site, and then photographs and images of the property and a map showing its location. So fact sheets like this have been prepared for all the properties. To recap, you'll be talking about the specific plan again later this month, but these development standards have been discussed at prior Planning Commission meetings. They include an increase in the height limit from 38 feet to 68 feet up to 85 feet north of Brighton Avenue, increases in the allowable floor area ratio, an elimination of the density limit. So in other words, the 63 unit per acre maximum in the current zoning and general plan would be eliminated. And I mentioned these changes to the other development standards that would make it easier to build additional units on San Pablo Avenue. The important distinction here is that the changes that are being proposed by the specific plan would put Albany's development standards on par with those in El Cerrito and Berkeley for San Pablo Avenue. So it is reasonable to look at projects in those two cities as comparables for what we can expect in Albany. Under current zoning, this is what you get. Basically, this is Portland Gardens and Albany Gardens on San Pablo Avenue, on just a couple blocks north of City Hall. Typically around 30 to 50 units per acre with 2 floors of housing over ground floor commercial and parking in the rear. You can see here what the densities are on the projects that have been built under current zoning regulations in Albany and what the floor area ratios are. With the new development standards in the specific plan, again, moving to densities that are more on par with El Cerrito and Berkeley, we have Appendix B identifies the characteristics of 32 projects that are within 2.5 miles of Albany on San Pablo Avenue and shows you what the densities have been or are proposed to be, what the floor area ratios are. And it breaks this down by parcel size, by current uses, by project status. In other words, is it built or is it approved, and by city. I think this is going to be really important when we take this to the state and they say, show us, City of Albany, that your development assumptions for your opportunity sites are realistic, particularly where projects have actually been built. In El Cerrito, a lot of this is proposed but not yet built. In Berkeley, it's mostly built. with some projects that are proposed, but we are able to point to former auto repair shops, former gas stations, former car lots, and so forth in the corridor that have been small sites less than half an acre that are redeveloping with 5 or 6 story mixed use projects at densities of 80 to actually well over 80 to 120 units per acre. We're trying to be conservative in this analysis and using the low end of the density range, which is more aligned with projects that have actually been built in the last few years. We are acknowledging that the higher densities are possible, but not a given, that we don't expect to see 200 units per acre on all of the sites that we've identified in the corridor. And also that not every opportunity site will redevelop by 2031. To Commissioner Pilch's question earlier, we're providing a buffer both in case these sites get pulled out to be used for something else and in case the sites don't develop. We want to make sure we have a sufficient variety of sites available. So the sum of San Pablo Avenue at the bottom of this slide in the center, you can see under current general plan and zoning designations with the 63 units per acre and an assumption that projects are going to be developing at about 30 to 35 units per acre. That would yield 309 units on the opportunity sites. With the yields that we're looking at in the specific plan, we're looking at about 880 units on the San Pablo Avenue specific plan sites. And I have a summary slide that adds all of this up, by the way, at the end of the presentation. Along Solano Avenue, so this is the 6th tier. We only had counted 2 sites in the 2015 housing element. Again, I mentioned earlier that the state requirements now require that we not concentrate all of our housing in one location, that we look at additional sites now that achieve more equitable outcomes in terms of where we locate housing, and that we should not just show the sites on the map, but also take actions to make these sites more realistic development opportunities. You're doing that very proactively on San Pablo Avenue with the specific plan. So if we identify additional sites on Solano Avenue, the expectation is that we're also going to include actions in our housing element that improve the developability and economics of building on these sites. By doing an analysis similar to the one that we did for San Pablo Avenue, we identified a total of 9 sites. So there were 7 additional sites that were identified, including the Albany Theater, several of the buildings with large parking lots like the Bank of America, the CVS, the 7-Eleven, the Safeway store. Cornell School has a frontage with the YMCA school-owned property, which provides an opportunity for something like teacher housing. It's public land. It's potentially an affordable site. There is one office building that met the criteria insofar as it has a parking lot, has a low improvement value relative to the land value. We know that there are other opportunities on San Pablo Avenue. This was not meant to be an exhaustive inventory of every single site. It's an inventory of those sites that meet a certain set of criteria that tend to support developability and that the state recognizes as legitimate criteria for determining that a site is viable for housing. So in terms of what kinds of incentives we might look at, without incentives, it's less likely that these sites will develop. With incentives, we would be looking at possibly about 100 additional housing units, so 133 without, 234 with, just on those sites. I should say, by the way, that does not include high density at the Safeway site. It includes something more moderate, something like townhomes or 2 to 3 story development. We are talking here about an additional 10 feet of height, so 45 feet rather than 35 feet, which could possibly be allowed only for projects with a specific set aside of affordable units, possibly looking at additional flexibility for the ground floor uses. In other words, not requiring commercial on the ground floor. An important thing to point out here is we're not asking that all of this be done as part of getting the housing element adopted. What we're talking about here is structuring an action program that would be implemented in the next 3 years, possibly longer than 3 years even, to look at zoning on Solano Avenue. So we're not rezoning Solano Avenue as part of the housing element update, but we are adopting an action program to examine the zoning so that we can make some of those sites more viable in the future. The final tier in this analysis is University Village. The University of California is planning 289 student apartments at the corner of Jackson on Monroe in the area you see outlined in blue here on the map. We have plans for these sites that have already been revealed to the regents. There was a ongoing question about whether or not we could count these units as affordable units or even as non-affordable units toward our RHNA. In fact, the university has said these will be below market rate. They're aimed at students who are mostly low or very low income. They are apartments with kitchens and bathrooms. Therefore, the city's position is that they should be eligible to be counted. Our conversations with the state at this point are kind of pessimistic on that point. The state is not allowing units like this to be counted in Irvine and Berkeley. And so we're still working with them to determine the outcome here. It's kind of critical to get their take on this in that it affects how aggressive we need to be in our rezoning. But I would say at this point, we're assuming that these units are not going to be eligible to be counted as affordable units or as lower income units toward our RHNA. So kind of a worst case scenario is that these 289 units are part of our buffer and not part of the RHNA. There is one other element in the equation here, and this is that we can count accessory dwelling units toward our RHNA. It has to be a reasonable projection of ADUs based on past trends. We looked at data on accessory dwelling unit production during the last 8-year cycle and feel it's reasonable to assume we'll continue to add roughly 10 accessory dwelling units a year. These typically are moderate income, but we have some rent data that we can use to support that about a third would be affordable to lower income, a third to moderate, and a third to above moderate. So that does reduce the number of low income somewhat. So here's the final tally. And I want to point out, I want to pause on this slide for just a moment. The first stacked column is where we land with no zoning changes. So this presumes existing zoning on San Pablo Avenue, existing zoning on Solano, existing zoning on the Albany Hill property, no UC Village counted. We are short of our RHNA target in this scenario by about 300 units. We're also way below that buffer that I mentioned. And I put the buffer at 25% here, which is just short of 1,400 units. So we could not meet the RHNA under our current zoning. Now, if the San Pablo specific plan is adopted as proposed, and we use the opportunity sites and the development assumptions that we've proposed, that gets us above both the RHNA and the RHNA with buffer. So we would be able to say that we have adequate sites with the San Pablo Avenue specific plan alone at its currently proposed height and FAR limits. The more aggressive scenario, which is to include the Solano rezoning, the Albany Hill rezoning, and counting the UC Village units, gets us above 1,900 housing units, which obviously is well above the RHNA with buffer. The state of California would like us to do the most aggressive option that we have available to us, but I thought it was important to point out that just to get the element certified, just to get it submitted, we will not have to make all of the zoning changes that I've laid out in the specific plan. Now, you may choose a less aggressive scenario in the San Pablo Avenue specific plan with lower heights in FAR, or you may decide that some of these opportunity sites should be off the list or other sites should be on the list. So it's a little bit of a fluid process at this point, but this is kind of where this is right now. So I'm going to wrap up with these two slides. First of all, I've pretty much said everything on this slide. Not all housing sites will develop, so we need to be flexible. It's important to keep in mind that housing may and should be built on other sites too. So we know that we haven't identified every single site where housing can be built. It's an imperfect science to identify these sites. We used a particular methodology. We know that there are projects percolating out there on some of the other sites, and you may be hearing about them. They can still be built at higher densities, and again, we don't know that the state will accept all of the sites that we are going to be presenting. So these are the discussion questions we're leaving you with this evening. First, questions or comments about the site selection process. Next, if there are any sites in the inventory that you feel should be removed or added. And then the two policy questions that we presented during the presentation, the first relating to Albany Hill and the second relating to any future zoning changes along San Pablo Avenue, specifically allowances for additional height, either for all projects or for projects that contain affordable units. It's a lot of information. I apologize for the hoarseness of my voice. I've been speaking a lot today, and my COVID test was negative, so that's not what it is. But thank you all, and I'm happy to answer questions and take your comments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Miller, so much. Oh, sorry, Chris, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just one point of clarification. Doug's Wi-Fi cut out, so he's actually calling in, and he's the number you guys are seeing on the panel, on the screen right now, but he is in the attendees list, just FYI.
Okay, great. And then I should be able to see your hand, Doug, if you want to speak as well. So we'll just work with that. I did have a quick initial question for Barry before we jump into, we'll maybe start with questions. I know this was a lot of information. Questions from the commission to Mr. Miller, then we'll open it up for public comment, and then we'll turn it back for commentary, just to sort of set the tone here. But my first question for you was on that, one of those last substantive slides you had with the bar charts and the different options. For the more aggressive option, my only question on that is, my understanding is that the state is continuing to get more stringent about the number of carryover sites that we can have from one cycle to another. So right. Strategically speaking, if we can go with the middle option and meet our numbers, what are your thoughts about, keeping those in our back pocket reserved for the next cycle, or, certainly action items to work on and would behoove us to have on various work programs, but not put them in the housing element, so that we have a buffer for the next cycle. If we end up with a bunch of sites that don't get developed, that we're not allowed to recycle for the next, and we need to find something else. It's sort of like, do we want to scratch the bottom of the barrel this round?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the change to state law was not to say you couldn't carry over sites, but if you did carry over sites, number one, you had to provide for by right approval for projects that had 20% affordable, which we're doing on the San Pablo Avenue corridor. So that requirement is met with those sites already anyway. But also to take a hard look at those sites, and if they didn't develop, to explain why they didn't and why we think they're going to develop in the next cycle. So you're right that we should be careful about identifying too many sites. And if there are some sites on this list that you think, no, we should reserve those for future, that's a legitimate objective and something that we may want to look at. So we're not quite so high above the target as we would be in that third option.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, my initial thought on it is that all of the third approach, the more extreme, seems like the right policy direction for the city to set out on. And that includes obviously two really big undertakings to think through that Albany Hill site and what an appropriate rezoning or density might be, as well as on Solano. So not to not do those, but maybe to not count them towards our arena goals this cycle and put them, maybe resolve those zoning issues so that we have capacity that we could account for in a future housing element without it being, so futuristic of a strategy, but still meet our numbers. But I don't know. Again, it's sort of do you support the concept versus what is the most strategic to put in our plan, I think are actually two different questions.
Right.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Miller before we open it up for public comment? I think we only have a couple speakers. Okay. Seeing no questions. Oh, Commissioner Polk.
Yeah, sorry, I was waiting because I have a number of questions. So I wanted to see if other people had some. Some of these are half questions, maybe half comments. So maybe I'll save some of these for after public comment. But let's see. Yeah, so I do want a little bit more clarification about those carried over sites. So one thing that just struck me as you said that is that if we carry over sites on San Pablo Avenue, then we will have certain sites on San Pablo Avenue that will be by right 20% affordable mixed in with whatever other zoning we do in the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, correct?
Not exactly. All that says, it's not changing the zoning of the site. The San Pablo Avenue zoning will still apply. It just is saying that if a project comes to you and 20% of the units are affordable in that project, you can't deny it. You can still do design review on it. You just can't turn it down. But I believe that the way the San Pablo Avenue is being structured is that will be the case for all projects if they meet the objective standards in that plan. And Jeff, maybe you can clarify. Yeah.
Yeah, as a practical matter, that's how state law is written today. That if a project meets our objective standards, then it does have to be approved, unless there's very specific findings that are very difficult to make. And those cities that have attempted to make those findings are finding themselves in litigation because of that.
Oh, okay. So now I thought I was clear, but now I'm confused. So it sounds like it doesn't really, everything's going to be by right on San Pablo Avenue in a way, right?
Provided that it meets the objective design standards of the plan. Yeah. Projects that depart from those standards would still need to go through a discretionary review process.
Oh, okay. Okay. So there wouldn't be any reason then for someone to come in with a 20% affordable project that meets objective design standards, because if they just met objective design standards, that would be enough for them to get by right. They wouldn't have to reduce the 20% as well.
That's correct. And so it becomes less of an issue on San Pablo Avenue. It would still be an issue on Solano and maybe in some other places.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to clarify that. I guess I just wanted to address a little the affirmatively furthering fair housing question. My understanding about that is that I guess it's true to say, as you do in the document, that generally what you need to spread the sites around the city. But how I heard it talked about previously was that you don't want to put all your sites in concentrated areas of poverty, for example, that would be considered very bad and would be very much against AFFH. But isn't, Albany is 70-something% zoned R1. And so if by saying that we're not going to put any affordable housing in over 70% of our city, isn't that going against AFFH?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things, a couple of ways to respond to that. First, the likelihood that you're going to get affordable units in those areas, given that they're almost completely built out, and the sites that are available are individual vacant lots. There really aren't, unless you start looking at redeveloping schools, because we're not looking at parks. We're not looking at private schools, for example. We would have to begin looking at those kinds of properties, but we're not, the value of single family homes that are owner occupied is such that it really makes it difficult to find single family neighborhoods or sites where we can take a patch of land and rezone it for multifamily or higher density. It's just not really something that's realistic in this case. I would say too, the other thing, you're absolutely right in the first point you made about not putting the sites in areas that have concentrated poverty. That's the real goal here, is to avoid concentrations of lower income housing in areas where they're already impacted. The only area that we have that meets that criteria is University Village, which is more of a function of the student incomes than it is of families living below the poverty rate. So it's a little bit different in Albany. Also, I think that law was intended for larger cities, San Jose, Los Angeles, Oakland, et cetera, and not for 1 square mile cities that are mature and built out.
Okay. So just a devil's advocate here. So you're saying that even if we rezoned like all of R1 to be multifamily with no limits, that likelihood of redevelopment in that area is low because of the value of those single family homes?
That's correct. And we looked at the assessed value of all of the houses and all of the land, all of the properties, and there's very little, there are very, very few parcels in Albany that where multifamily would be economically logical.
Okay.
It's also ownership too. Yeah, because those parcels are small and they're owned by different different parties. If you had a block where the houses were all on 5,000 square foot lots, but they were owned by one party that rented out all of the houses, that would be one thing, but we don't have that anywhere in Albany.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, great. So in terms of housing production, that's just not a strategy. Got it. And let's see. Oh, you mentioned that R2 sites are unlikely to be redeveloped. Can you speak to that?
So we only identified, we identified 2 vacant R2 sites in the city. And again, they're small sites. They're, in this case, I think they're both smaller than 5,000 square feet. Almost all of the R2 lots in the city are 5,000 square feet or less, or they're developed with apartment buildings already. So, when you get into that granular fine grain analysis, there just really are no opportunities or very few opportunities on the R2 zone parcels to do anything that's, that's going to pencil out.
Okay, so it's similar to the answer for R1 then, because the R2 parcels are very similar to the R1 parcels, is what you're saying, I think.
There's more rental housing stock. Part of the objective here too is to not displace existing rental housing stock. So, we're also looking at ways to build housing that don't require removing housing. So I think that's, another lens that you could think of this through, which is why we were so limited in looking at those areas. Where we picked R3 sites was where, yes, there was a home that would be displaced, but, if you removing one rental house and getting 40 rental houses or 30 rental houses in its place, there's a significant net gain. Whereas if you're removing one unit and getting 2 units, the gain is really marginal.
Okay, got it. Okay, I think, that's all my questions for now. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Commissioner McLeod? You're on mute, Commissioner.
Yeah, just kind of a corollary to what Commissioner Pilch was asking, kind of in relation to R1. New state law allows subdivision of single family properties into 2 units, that sort of thing. Do you see that as not, we thought that would not have much of an effect here either because of the small lots and all that. So is that your take on it as well? And that's why you didn't really include anything based on that recent state law?
The main reason is that those units would not be eligible to be counted as affordable to low or very low income households. And without that incentive, it's really what the state wants cities to focus on are opportunity sites for multifamily housing. And we have to show that a site can accommodate 20 units per acre if we want to count it. And, you know, those small R1 sites are just not going to cut it. I mean, they may be great for duplexes and moderate income housing, but that's not really the focus of this exercise. So yeah, we'll get some units out of that, but not a significant number and not serving the income groups that we need to focus on in this process.
Okay, so yeah, really we're looking at larger, trying to create the conditions necessary to encourage larger projects on
right.
various sites. And then just kind of speculating a little bit, what do you think the effect would be to raise our R3 standards? I mean, we could, you know, I mean, there's a lot of options open to us in terms of upzoning. You know, what could we do in terms of our R3 zoning to create more housing? You know, I mean, I kind of see we're raising San Pablo, and in a way, we want the tide to raise all boats. So in the same sense that we want the zoning to sort of raise up across the whole city. So if we're raising the San Pablo corridor, why aren't we raising the R3 zones near San Pablo and along Brighton? You know, and I think that could have a pretty good effect too, I would hope, but.
Yeah, again, I think you could raise the maximum density on in R3 to something higher than 63 units per acre. I don't think it's going to get you a whole lot in terms of additional units. There are not that many sites in the R3 district that have housing potential. You know, they're either developed with apartment buildings or they're owner-occupied homes. As a matter of fact, the application you heard earlier this evening on Talbot is right there in the R3 zone. It's, you know, owners invest in their properties, and a single individual 4,000 square foot lot is just not really going to help you unless you can aggregate sites into something larger. You know, I don't know. I think where there may be some opportunity is actually looking along Adams and Keynes on R2 zone land that could be upzoned to R3. And there are some existing apartment buildings, for example, in the R2 zone that would be better matched with the R3 zoning, for example. But again, that's just reflecting what's already there and not creating opportunities for additional units.
Okay, well, that's all I was going to ask for now.
Okay, Commissioner Pilch, you have another question?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. So there's nothing, so it might not buy us much, but there's nothing to say that we have to stick with a maximum 63 units per acre that's in our general plan. We could eliminate that entirely. Is that correct?
You need some metric for density or intensity. So if you were to eliminate the 63 units, you'd have to replace it with floor area ratio or something else. And potentially, I mean, you're doing this in the San Pablo Avenue specific plan area already, so there will already need to be an amendment to the general plan that happens with that document to show the new density or the floor area ratio that's being considered there. So, you know, the short answer is yes, you could do that, but you couldn't eliminate it and just leave nothing.
Okay. Well, I guess I'm not quite understanding that, but maybe that's not a question for right now. But I guess I'm wondering if I'm looking for, and we can maybe bring this back in discussion. If there's anything that's that we haven't considered changing with regard to density that would allow us for more units in the areas where that can be redeveloped multifamily. It seemed like that would also be something to go for, but we can bring that back. Thank you.
Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, I guess, thinking again, right, I was looking at a project in Berkeley at the BART station where they didn't have any density limits, and they had to actually identify the building envelope and how many, use an average unit size to figure out how many units that site could support. So there are ways to do it, I guess, without floor area ratio. So I'm just wondering kind of the effect of floor area ratio, sort of where I'm going, and how much that is a limiting factor on what gets built, and how amending that can increase, making it more generous, can increase the number of units we can get built. What's your take on that?
The advantage of floor area ratio, and the reason that it's used in commercial areas, is that it doesn't limit the number of units in the building. It just limits the size of the envelope. So it would be an incentive for smaller units in some respects, because you would have your building square footage defined, and you could choose whether you want to make those 500 square feet units or 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet. That's up to you as the developer. Whereas with density, it's very, it's straightforward. You know how many units you can build on the site. It's driven by whatever that metric is. So if it's 63 units per acre and you have a half an acre, you get your 32 units or whatever that. If it's an FAR of 2, you can do that by building some really large, a small number of really large units or a large number of really small units. It's just much more flexible as to what the product is. So, yeah, and it all depends on how high you set the FAR also, and what your height limits are. So there are other variables. It's not just the FAR that drives the ultimate development.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. It looks like that wraps questions from commissioners. So why don't we go ahead and open up public comment? It looks like we might have a couple of people in the queue here. So if you are a member of the public and want to speak on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand now, and Chris will man the queue.
Yes. For speaker up, we have Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Oh, thanks. So yeah, we keep talking about this whole 20%, low income. And then I was just wondering what percentage of this housing requirement needs to be ADA accessible? Is it 100%? Or some units probably won't be ADA accessible for whatever reason. There's no elevator, or I don't know, for whatever reason. So I was just curious if there is a percentage on ADA accessible units, what is that percentage? And also that goes for the low income. What percentage of the low income, what percentage of the 20% needs to be ADA accessible as well? So that's one point. Another one is the ADUs in the backyard of a primary or of a mother house, I guess. Is it possible that those could be 2-story? Maybe that's what McLeod meant by generous. I may have picked that up. I'm not sure if that's correct, but when you use generous, to me, that meant building up. But I don't know, I may be incorrect. But hey, it sounds good. So I was wondering if ADUs could be 2-story. Also, meeting the low income requirement, can the ADUs be to where there's a maximum income or a maximum rent able to take, or like, you know, in other words, all ADUs would be designated as low income. I mean, what are you gonna fix up an ADU so nice you're gonna get $3,000 a month for an ADU? I mean, come on. You know, gonna try to get 3,100 off an ADU. I mean, I don't know. I don't get it. Where's the line for those ADUs? I know everybody's trying to get as much as they can if you're the homeowner, you know. Just wondering where the line is drawn on ADUs, if there's a maximum on what they could charge. Also, I was going to ask for 1 or 2 extra minutes because I'm on a housing subcommittee with the Social and Economic Justice Commission, and I'm one of the 3 attending this meeting tonight and the only one attending. And I was going to ask a question about high school students' housing. They graduate and they're 18 years old, and let's say their parents say, hey, well, you're on your own, kid. Well, now you have an 18-year-old's, you know, adult kid here in Albany potentially would be homeless. So is there any of this housing for students, for high school students, or just turning 18, or just students in general that have a difficult time finding housing, I guess? I know when you think of students, you think of UC Berkeley students. So that's all. Thank you.
Thanks. And I would just comment, Jeremiah, if you do have any follow-up questions related to housing, it would be great if you could email those to staff, and then they can try to provide some follow-up answers for you, especially since this isn't Q&A. But thank you for those comments, and feel free to shoot any other questions over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Waddy, for that. Yes, absolutely, Jeremiah. Please know that we'd be happy to support your commission's work on housing and be available to meet at your convenience.
Next speaker up is Brian Martin. Brian, you have 3 minutes beginning now.
Great, thanks. I appreciate the report. I'm concerned about equity with issues with the report. Speaker made clear that the equity is a state requirement. As we can see from the report, the vast majority of counted new housing is along one narrow strip of town, San Pablo Avenue, and the existing homes nearby. There are benefits to high density housing, but also significant negative impacts, which I've shared in the past at city meetings. And the city attorney spelled out for me, which I've also shared with this commission. As I live near the bowling alley and right back up against 618 San Pablo Avenue, which was just identified as a site of interest. With redlining in mind, cities are reevaluating R1 housing. Not all rezoning needs to be with this quota in mind. Or why would the city not rezone R1 to something higher? I would think the city should do it to A, provide homeowners with more flexibility. Why constrain homeowners, including homeowners who already lift their homes at great expense, from adding additional units on their parcels? Are there parking concerns? If so, why only parking concerns in R1 and not parking concerns along San Pablo? All are walkable to shops and transit. B, make clear that redlining is in Albany's past. C, equity, equity, equity. These are all reasons to rezone, upzone R1. Have a plan in place in case the city needs to rebuild after a big fire or earthquake. E, allow vacant properties the option to build more units. Again, this doesn't need to be included in the RHNA totals, but it should be done regardless. A question I have I'd like to hear a response is, what does it mean that a site is an opportunity site? Besides putting it in the RHNA totals, does the city actually do anything with sites in that designation? I did want to say I'm in favor of reforms to measures K and D. I do ask that a revision of this report include a very dense city hall triangle plan for 100% low-income housing. The city not long ago figured out how to temporarily relocate offices and services during construction on that site. Instead of commercial, city services would be on the ground floor. I see few major hurdles if funded with grants, as on Cleveland with Saha. Any calls to relocate these city services to somewhere else entirely permanently to free up the triangle, I think are not practical, and the city services should just stay there underneath the housing. In El Cerrito, much of San Pablo Avenue is 1 block from the Greenway, so it's hard to compare those to much of San Pablo Avenue in Albany that abuts homes. I'm in favor of higher densities on the Albany Hill property, and Measure K should be revised. Solano, I think, needs to have the same parameters for building a San Pablo Avenue. Why would it not? Homes are adjacent to.
Okay, time's up. Next speaker is Clay Larson. Clay, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Miller's report identified 880 housing opportunity sites in the San Pablo Avenue corridor. The San Pablo Avenue vision specific plan identified 1160, about 25% more. Mr. Miller characterized his 880 as a realistic estimate. Or is he suggesting that Lexington planning had an unrealistic estimate? I also, regarding the possibility of including incentives for development on Solano Avenue, it was offered rather timidly in the report, and it got even more timid in the discussions. And so we're now talking about this as a reserve or a bonus. It was originally suggested as a necessary response to the requirement in federal law, but also state law, that housing opportunities should be spread throughout the city. It's not clear now whether that's just a heck of a good idea or an actual requirement. So I think that would be great to get that clarified. I also got a little time left. I pass along my editorial comment. I've made it several meetings. There are many planning guidelines that characterize the general plan as it gives it constitutional status. It's something that directs. It's something that directs the planning efforts. That has not been the case either with the specific plan process and as we continue here with looking at the housing element. All these proposals involve significant changes in the land use requirements set forth. We have very specific requirements in our general plan, and it's occasionally given a passing by shout out suggesting, well, at some point we're going to have to change the general plan. That's a heck of a way to treat a constitution. All right, that's my comments.
Okay. Next speaker, Kathy. Kathy, you have 3 minutes to speak, beginning now.
I really don't have any comments. I have attended the December housing element meeting and this meeting, and both meetings had excellent presentations. And I recall the presentations were going to be posted on the city website. But when I go to the housing element section of the website, I never see any presentations. So I'm just wondering where these presentations are and if they can be posted and when they would be posted. There's a lot of good information. You know, you take notes on this, but it's nice to have the presentations to refer back to. So the ones that Barry Miller has presented. And the same for the San Pablo specific plan. I never see any of the presentations posted there. So that would be my request, is that you make this information more accessible and available to the public. And that's all. Thank you.
Next speaker, Ed Fields. Ed, you have 3 minutes to speak, starting now.
Good evening. I want to make a similar observation to what several of the previous speakers have made. I'm not attributing any nefarious design to Barry's work, but when you look at the 3, I guess, bar graphs, it's pretty clear that the San Pablo Avenue specific plan is hostage, that if you tweak it in any way and reduce any of the proposed increases, you flunk, right? You don't meet the bar for RENA. So it just has to be approved as proposed. And as for Solano Avenue or Albany Hill, well, we'll just think about them. You know, maybe we'll come up with a work plan. I could think of a few other things that I was going to talk about earlier that we're still just thinking about, but they're a little off the topic. And so now we've put Solano Avenue and Albany Hill into sort of a don't show your cards to the state category. Let's hide them and not even tell them they exist. And maybe we'll use them 8 years from now, who knows? So as for the fairness requirement, which is what I'm talking about, I look at census tracts. I don't like the word granular, but they're not granular enough. I live on the R3 side of Kings. On my block, there's a fourplex, a sixplex. People have lived in those for a long time. The rents are fairly low, which is good. And the people who live in them don't earn a lot of money. And most of the remaining single-family homes are rentals. In fact, the home I live in, when we purchased it, it was a rental, and that's why, because it was on Keynes partly, and because it was a rental, it was more affordable, and we couldn't have afforded to live a few blocks into the R1 zone. So I think if you looked at the income levels on Keynes and Adams, for example, where there is already a lot of multifamily housing, you would find that those income levels are probably considerably lower than the average for the city, not counting UC Village, of course, and certainly lower than in many of the R1 areas. And I think that that is something that you should consider more carefully. Thank you.
Okay, there are no more speakers that I'm seeing in the queue right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. So last call for public comment. Seeing no hands raised, we will go ahead and close public comment and return it back to the commission for conversation. And maybe before we go there, I just want to give an opportunity to Barry, if you either have any follow-up or if there are any targeted questions that you would like the commission's comments on. I know you had a couple, we talked through a couple of them, but if there's anything specific you would like our discussion to focus on, please let us know.
Thank you, Chair Waddy. I was actually going to respond to a couple of the public comments that had been made, if I may.
Please.
A couple just particular ones, because Clay had mentioned the discrepancy between the 880 units and the 1,160 units. The bulk of that is the Albany Bowl project, which I counted as a committed project. And in the specific plan area, that's counted as a few. That's part of the 1,160 number is the bowl. So that's 207 units of difference right there, which makes up most of the gap. And we're also supposed to, in the housing element, base this on comparable projects in other cities. And whereas a development capacity analysis is looking more at the higher end of the range. So there is a distinction between, what an analysis for an environmental document might be versus what we're being asked to produce by the state, which is what are you most likely to see based on what is being built in other cities. So there's some wiggle room there. Jeremiah asked some good questions at the beginning, and I did want to just point out there's no requirement to set aside a specific percentage of units as being ADA compliant. I mean, all units would need to comply with the building code, and the housing element itself needs to address the needs of persons with disabilities and the need for universal access and housing that's ADA accessible, so it will be covered. The issue of two-story ADUs and some of the other issues that the speakers brought up will not necessarily be addressed in the sites analysis, but they will be addressed in the next part of the this process, which is the analysis of government regulations and constraints. So sites analysis is really looking at where are the locations where we can put multifamily, lower income, affordable housing in the city. The constraints analysis is really looking at how are our zoning standards working? Do we need to tweak our R3? Do we need to tweak our R1? Do we need to change our parking? So we're going to get to that point where we're looking at whether two-story ADUs are feasible, whether we need to upzone R1. That's not going to really help us for RENA, but it is a valid question and a valid point. And I just wanted to say to Kathy, we will put those presentations online. Thank you for the reminder to do that. We'll try to get it done this week.
Great. And then Barry, anything specific you'd like commissioners to focus on? We're certainly happy to chat, but I know conversation can get away from us when we're talking about housing element in general. And I know we're kind of breaking up these topics at each of these hearings. So if you want to help focus us,
I think, great. Yeah. And I think the discussion questions were really on any specific sites or sites that you thought should come off the list or that should be added to the list. So the conversation about whether we should be looking at changing the zoning of R3 or R1, I mean, those are somewhat germane to that, but if you saw a site in this inventory that you thought, no, that should come out, you know, that's all helpful. And then the two policy conversations, one about Albany Hill and the other about looking at changes to development standards on on Solano Avenue would both be helpful. And I think, you know, to Ed's point about the San Pablo Avenue specific plan, at this point, nothing is a done deal. These are all draft documents. They're works in progress. And I expect that what gets submitted to the state a year from now is going to be different than what you're looking at tonight in some way.
Great. Well, and I'll just jump out of the gates here. I don't have a whole lot of commentary on it. I mean, I think the individual sites that you guys presented in the staff report for this evening, there are no major red flags for me for anything that needs to come off, and there are no sites aside from the two that you were sort of talking about before that I think need to be added on. And again, this to me is through the lens of this is absolutely an art, not a science. These are based on, as you mentioned, standard principles that can be applied property to property to property that we can explain back to the state. Doesn't mean that the property owners who own those are interested in developing or selling or anything along those lines. Those are sort of the real world development constraints that I think happen. And certainly we may see other properties that no one knew about that by fluke come forward as development. And so I think that's pretty normal, but I think for the sake, again, for the exercise of doing the housing element, which is supposed to be that 10,000 foot picture of where we think we can put housing, I don't have any major issues with what you guys have presented. So I think all of that looks great. To your later question about the Albany Hill and Solano, I would probably err on the side of not including those in the housing element, but I think those are absolutely efforts that we need to put on our future work program to talk through in a really strategic way. I certainly do think that the Albany Hill site needs to be, we need to take a second look at it, and whether that's sort of a city-sponsored rezoning for the ballot or what the exact mechanics are. I certainly think it deserves a higher level of density. I think there's support for it, especially if it was strategically rezoned with, you know, constrained density development along the street frontage with a, you know, very high percentage of open space preservation, you know, things along those lines. I think there's a way to get, you know, not a cookie cutter, you know, going back 40 years or 50 years, but a sort of a new take on a higher density and a more scalpeled approach to how that parcel is rezoned. But again, that's a big effort in and of itself. And I think that's something that we can put on our to-do list, but don't necessarily need to count it for the housing element. And then similarly with Solano. I actually, unlike one of the speakers, I do think Solano is very different than San Pablo. It's a different zoning district. And I think the character of Solano is very different than San Pablo. And I think we've had a lot of conversations about that being done intentionally. But I do think there are certainly parts of Solano that can accommodate higher heights and higher densities. But again, bigger nuanced conversation about sort of commercial, ground floor commercial, where do we want it? What do we want? What's the parking levels that we would want on Solano? And again, good work program, to-do list item, but I would be comfortable not counting it since, as proposed in the middle bar graph, we have enough to cover our buffer of RENA, and we can maybe cash in those other efforts on, you know, housing element 10 years from now. So that concludes my thoughts. So happy to turn it over now to Commissioner McLeod.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to compliment Barry on a really excellent presentation. It's really clear, concise. It shows exactly what we need to do, you know, what our opportunities are. I think it's really, really helpful. You know, on the big questions, yeah, I'm absolutely supportive of a robust upgrade in our San Pablo specific plan. I don't think we're held hostage to that. I think that's something we should do and need to do anyway, even without the housing element. But that it dovetails almost perfectly with our housing element, I think is a good thing. And I think we need to make it as robust as possible in terms of encouraging housing. I think it makes for a better urban environment. It makes for a more vibrant city, and it's actually the more environmental thing to do to create more housing here. So it's a plus on all counts as far as I'm concerned. I think there are very few negatives. You know, we want to make it a transit-rich corridor with the potential rapid bus line. It would be transit-rich from every point on San Pablo Avenue. We're within a, you know, everything is within walking distance of BART, even if for more than half a mile. So it's the perfect place to put housing. You know, and I do support the idea of spreading it around the city. Pier Street, we had that one project that came before us a few years ago that I thought was really pretty bad in terms of how much land it chewed up for low density. I thought it was a really unfortunate project, which is why I opposed it. And I thought at that time, and maybe Jeff could clarify a bit, but I thought that we had started the ball rolling towards repealing Measure K at that point, because the whole point for me would be to put more density at the bottom of the hill and preserve the open space at the top of the hill. So more density along the lines, along the strip where the existing high density high rises are, in exchange for open space at the top. I think the project that came before us was going to use up, you know, pretty much cover up about 80% of that parcel and leave just a little strip at the top narrow for public access and kind of park-like, a park-like setting. Whereas, you know, if we do it right, we could develop maybe the lower third of that parcel and leave the upper 2/3 open space. And I would support that. I think it's a really beautiful site. It's actually maybe critical monarch butterfly habitat, provides habitat to a lot of little critters. I mean, there's some value in having these hillsides run all the way down, so there's access for animals to the bay and all that. They talk about corridors, hillside corridors for animals that migrate up and down, but that would be more of an open space question. And I think it would be good to get that ball rolling with Measure K repeal. I thought it was going to happen sooner. I was hoping it would happen sooner. I thought council had actually directed staff to look into that. So, you know, I would definitely support that. So regarding Solano Avenue, I absolutely support upzoning Solano Avenue. I think it, for the same reasons that upzoning San Pablo makes for a more lively and better urban street and a better commercial street, the same reasons apply to Solano Avenue. And it can certainly support 2 or 3 or maybe even in some cases 4 stories of housing above a commercial storefront or a commercial, you know, set of spaces on the bottom. You know, I think it's a perfect place to put more housing. You know, there have been conversations with BART. It's way down the line potentially, but if there is more density on Solano Avenue, it could maybe support a smaller neighborhood BART station. You know, BART has talked about putting more stations along the line, and you know, if we're dense enough, that would be an absolute boon to our commercial strip to have a BART station there. Of course, that's looking way into the future, but it is a possibility as an urban, you know, as urban growth goes along. Looking at all the signs, the sites in the proposal. I don't have any objections to any of them really. And I don't really have any others that I could think of putting in there. You know, the only one I maybe had questions about was the Wells Fargo parking lot, how viable that would actually be. I thought the idea of daylighting the creek was terrific there. So somehow balancing the idea of development with opening up a little strip of the creek would be good. You know, a lot of people have mentioned, and it's not the first time it's come up, but spreading the zoning around the city a little more, and I would support upgrading some of the R2 zones that Mr. Miller has talked about, and also I would support upzoning R3. You know, so I think it's sort of like we want to raise all boats, you know, sort of thing, and upzone the whole city. In fact, we don't really have R1 anymore. De facto, it's with ADUs allowed and the new state law that allows you to put second units on your property. There is really no R1 per se. It's something we could potentially, you know, put into our general plan and eliminate R1, but it might not have much of an effect. So that would be something to look at, but I think it would have less of an effect given that there are already these other opportunities for adding units to R1 at the moment. So I would definitely, to sum up, I would definitely support the robust San Pablo Avenue plan and upzoning Solano Avenue for sure. The only other thing I would have question marks about would be the Cleveland kind of corridor down there, or sort of semi-industrial workshop space kind of space. If there's any opportunities there, I'm not really sure. That's something I would have to look at, or somebody else could help us look at. That's it for the moment. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Pilch.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to try to focus on the opportunity sites. I might make a few other comments, but I'll try to focus. While Berkeley went along and organically grew, and El Cerrito proactively pursued a San Pablo Avenue specific plan years and years ago, Albany at one point, in the past 20 years said, no, we're going to be different. We're going to set a 38-foot height limit. We're going to stop all growth. And we had a measure that had 2 parking spaces per that we had to repeal. Albany really went in the other direction. And I think it's going to take a lot to move us into the right direction, and which is the direction that the state is requiring us to go, and which I think is the direction we need to go in order to provide housing. So I think we can't be timid. I think that people have looked at Albany as a place where they're not going to build housing and overlook it. So we've got to appear like we really do want housing. And so one thing we have to do is definitely include the Albany Hill site. So that's already, there's a lot of political will to have that as an opportunity site and to provide a lot of density there. I think you'll find a lot of political support for that. And with that, and also with the sites near the El Cerrito Plaza, those will require ballot measures. And so, and they also will require EIRs. So the point, so what I thought there was will at the council to do was to go ahead and do the EIRs as part of the housing element for both the sites near the plaza and for the Albany Hill site. So we get that done, and then in 2024, we go to the ballot and reform Measure K and reform Measure D. And if we don't do that now, then we're 8 to 10 years out before we can do that again, before we will do that again, because we have to go through the EIR process. So I don't think there's any question that we should include the Albany Hill site now. Otherwise, we won't be able to jump on it for years and years and years and years. I think that, again, considering that we have a lot to catch up on, we need to be bold, and I support the Solano Avenue sites, absolutely. And, another 10 feet in height limit, I would support even more, but perhaps that's the right balance to take at this point in order to be politically feasible, as another 10 feet in height. But I definitely support Solano. And speaking of Solano, the site next to the school is a great site. And in fact, the previous school superintendent had his eye on that too, as a redevelopment site. And that should be perhaps there should be special zoning there, because it's right next to a 3-story school, to have maximum height and maximum density for that site. As far as redeveloping the Albany, the cinema site, I have mixed feelings about that. I would hate to see the Albany theater go away. On the other hand, theaters are going away, unfortunately, because of how we do entertainment. So if anyone was with me about taking that out of the site inventory so we could more likely preserve the theater, that would be great, but I might be reaching a bit there. And then I think those were my big comments, and let me see if I had any others. Yeah, I think that another constraint that we have, not only having gone backwards and now having to jump way forward, is the fact that we have to prove to the state that our plan is realistic. And we're recycling a lot of sites. And so I'm a little bit concerned that the state is going to look at that and say, we don't necessarily like your analysis of the fact that you think these sites can be recycled. So I think that by demonstrating to the state that we're really open, that we really want to maximize the number of opportunity sites, we're in a better position to go in front of the state. And we're a little bit time constrained now. A number of other cities are farther along in this process, and the commissioners will note that we do have this, we have to put a draft plan before the state, and they have 45 days to come back to us with comments. Is that it?
It's actually been extended to 90 days now. There was some legislation passed in September that gave the state additional time to review our draft.
Okay. So we have to get a draft done so we can get it to the state, and then they might have take as long as 90 days to get it back to us. So I don't think I think we just ought to open up. We ought to maximize the opportunity sites so that we are in a better position not to be challenged by the state. And if we really believe we want to produce housing, to actually produce housing. So I think I'll leave it there. And thank you, Barry Miller, for a great presentation as well from me. And then I don't know if Doug knows how to raise his hand since he's on the phone, but we got to check in with him, I guess.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and unmute Doug just in case he has a few items to share.
I asked to unmute.
Or you might just want to push *6. Try that, Doug, if you can. Or if you're using a rotary telephone, you might be out of luck. Just a joke.
I think it's *6. I think that's right. That should unmute.
That's it.
We'll give Doug another little bit here. So I feel like Doug rarely doesn't have a few comments to share with us, and we all appreciate them. So,
well,
in the meantime, Commissioner McLeod, why don't you go ahead while Doug tries to figure it out?
Yeah, just a question, and I think we brought it up before, but state density bonus law will potentially get us more units, but it's not something we can count on for the RHNA totals. Is that true? Just so the public understands that.
That is absolutely true. We can't count density bonus units, even though they will likely be included in most of these projects.
Right. So,
yeah.
And then my other thought is that state density bonus law could be changed, could be repealed, could go away, so that we can't really count on that for our housing production necessarily further down the road. And I don't know. There's a ballot initiative that may repeal some of that and that sort of thing. So
yeah, you can always adopt a local density bonus program in lieu of the state program. I mean, the state program will still apply if it's a state program, but you can give the public the option of choosing a local program. A couple of cities have done that.
Okay. And then my last question, I guess, would be that we've considered raising our inclusionary zoning ordinance from 15% to 20%, and we would have to do an economic analysis for that. What effect do you think that would have on housing production, or would that be how do you think that could affect our totals?
I think that's a question better answered by an economist or a developer, and you'll get a different answer from it. If you ask a planner that question, you're going to get a different answer from everyone you talk to. I mean, it really varies from city to city.
Okay, well, that's it. Hopefully Doug is available to speak. I would, hope to hear his comments.
Is anyone in touch with Doug by text or
emailed him?
Email or something?
He does want to speak, but apparently the *6 feature isn't working. Not sure what to do about that.
And Chris, you don't have an ability to unmute him directly?
No, I can't, unfortunately. I can only ask him to unmute, which I've been doing. Doug, you may want to try hanging up and calling again real quick.
We'll stay on the line. In the meantime, Commissioner Pilch, you have your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you. Just one other thing I forgot is that I think we should remain pessimistic about the state allowing us to include the UC Village units and just not count on that. And therefore, another reason to be more aggressive with keeping all the opportunity sites Seeger identified.
While we're waiting, if I may just kind of jump in and confirm the comments that both Commissioner Pilch and Commissioner McLeod talked about with Albany Hill, your memories about that are correct. We did talk about, we do have a dated specific plan and dated zoning standards for that parcel. And we do, setting aside this housing element process, that needs to be updated. The property is on the market, has been for a number of years, and is continuing to be actively marketed. So I think it's a priority to bring the zoning into alignment with our vision for that property sooner rather than later. And if we can find some synergy in the environmental review work that we're going to do for the housing element and incorporate that at the same time, if that's acceptable to the commission, the city council, that's great. If for strategic reasons we decide not to do that, then that would become a priority work item for us as a separate project. And a lot of this is, some of our earlier discussions were predicated on taking a look at this inventory that you're seeing for the first time tonight. So it's we're kind of making decisions and evolving our decision-making processes as we get further into this. The second thing I'll mention, just as a preview, it's not in your housing element list of potential opportunity sites, but you will be seeing an application probably at your next meeting, a study session on a preliminary application on Solano Avenue for 12 units of housing. And so you'll have a chance to kind of test out your thoughts a little bit about what the potential zoning envelopes you might be comfortable with, and what some of the issues that might arise with the higher density housing development on Solano.
Great. Why don't we, Doug, if you want to give it one more try to be able to unmute yourself and talk, now would be a great time.
One thing I've done, Doug, is use the #6 instead of the *6. So make sure you try both combinations, maybe.
If
All right.
for some reason we can't get Commissioner Donaldson's comments, hearing that the commissioners, of course, do value his input into this, and it's important to us to hear that too. Barry and I will get together and we'll figure out a way if we can have some sort of perhaps a brief agenda item at a future meeting that's just a continuation of this, continuation of commission discussion, so that Commissioner Donaldson can provide his feedback and everybody can hear that at the same time. I'm not exactly, I don't want to commit to anything in particular until Barry and I have a chance to talk about it, but we'll figure something out to get his input into this and get all of you a chance to hear it.
Great. Thanks. Why don't we then go ahead and close this item then, since the rest of us have provided feedback. So again, thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you.
And again, this is not the last of the housing element discussions, but we're just taking these bite size at a time, and there'll certainly be opportunities for more comment in the future. We do still have one more item on our agenda this evening, so why don't we go ahead and move on to that. This is item 8-1, the Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair reorganization. And with that, I'll turn it over to staff for a quick intro.
Well, as a starting point, I'd ask the commission to consider whether you want to take this on, given that Commissioner Donaldson's having some connection problems and Commissioner Roman is not here this evening. And whether you'd like to have a full complement of the commission to talk about the chair and vice chair for the coming year.
Yeah, I think that would be best, especially considering that Commissioner Donaldson is here, but he can't speak. So yeah, if we can defer that in another meeting, I think that would be best.
I'm supportive of that as well.
Yeah,
and we're at a late hour this evening
anyway. That's fine.
Great. Why don't we just push it out to the next agenda where you think we'll have capacity? Great. All right then. Oh, I guess we should open it. Why don't we open it up for public comment? We do have to take, right? This is an action item. Is it not an action item? The reorganization, I always forget on this one.
I suppose since we did have just a brief conversation, if there is a member of the public that perhaps briefly would want to say something about the continuance, we should provide that opportunity, but obviously.
All right, why don't we go ahead and then open up public comment on the continuance of the Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair appointments.
We have one speaker, Jeremiah. Jeremiah, you have 3 minutes starting now.
Thank you. You know, I just want to be honest with everybody. Chair Waddy, you're doing a great job as chair, and my public comment next time when this comes up anyway, I would vote for you or I would nominate you. I don't know if anybody else wants to do it, but you know, you're doing a fantastic job. And with this commission, you know, you don't really have any students on here. And this is a serious commission, I've noticed, and it's really important for the city that everything is organized, and which you are. So, you know, I think that I'm not going to speak for other people or foreshadow, but I appreciate you being willing to have everybody participate, you know, for the next meeting or whenever it takes place. I just believe that maybe those people are going to vote for you anyway, but just keep on doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. And I think with this commission, it's kind of like, you know, just go with what's going good. You know, if it's going good, just keep going with it, you know? So nothing's broke. So no real need to fix anything here. I don't see. I think I spoke enough on this one. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you.
Right, and it looks like that is it. So we will go ahead and close public comment. And again, we'll continue this to the next available hearing where we can all participate. If that works. Great. I don't think we have to take a vote on it. We're just going to do it. And with that, item 9 on our agenda, next meeting, January 26th. And I guess quick question, I like to keep checking in at this stage of COVID. Same venue, Zoom channel, no back in person?
No back in person. I think we're in a little bit of a surge, in fact. So I think everybody should be careful and stay safe and stay healthy.
Perfect. Sounds good. Then same time, same place. We'll see everyone January 26th. And with that, we're adjourned.